wholesale trade sector, their government sector, their education sector. It's really about how those sectors are modernizing, how those sectors are innovating, that determines the standard of living and the growth in a country. And that's why services innovation and services trade are so important, because they give countries the tools to do that. So let me just use an example from retail. I'm not an expert on Walmart, and you can disagree with me, but there's a wonderful McKinsey study, McKinsey Global Institute did a study a few years ago, and it looked at why did U.S. productivity essentially double? Which, by the way, one of the reasons U.S. productivity doubled from 95 to even today, the main reason was IT. So just to give you an example, the U.S., and it was the use of IT, by the way. It wasn't Intel, Microsoft. Those are important. They create jobs, they create good jobs, but it was companies using IT. That created a U.S. economy today that is $2 trillion larger than the economy would have been otherwise. Put that in perspective, that's 2.5 Indian economies on a non-PPP basis. Just from the growth of using IT in companies like Walmart and other kinds of enterprises. So now you go to India, and India is restricting Walmart, who could be this big engine of growth in India. You go to a country like Argentina, where Argentina, as far as I know, is the only country in the world that has had negative productivity growth in their grocery store sector over the last decade. And why do they have negative productivity growth? In other words, food's costing more for the average Argentinian. It's because they have systemic policies to stop foreign companies from coming in with big box, more efficient retail arrangements, and they sort of tie their hands and make it really hard, and they have discriminatory policies in favor of the smallest, most inefficient grocery establishments. And as a result, they have negative productivity growth and high food costs. So I really think that we really need to rethink about how we think about services trade. It's not just about getting services exports. It's about getting the best services you can get in your country to drive growth. And the only way you're going to do that is through global liberalization to get the best firms.
It opened up only about 15 years back. It is one of the leading telecom nations across the globe. So I'm also hoping that the areas that are like we touched upon retail is in the process of happening. But eventually, the social fabric and social structure of India, of countries like India, is quite very different. There are many stakeholders involved, and we need to go through the process before you really reach the conclusions. And I think we're getting there. So I'm important agreement that domestic growth has to be seen as much as we see outside. Scott?
Well, for full transparency, our partner in India is this gentleman. But I think, just to touch on an earlier comment, which was to say in APEC, for example, that the agricultural ministers and the labor ministers aren't involved. To me, that's the world of business. The fact is that the agricultural minister of China knows that Walmart has 300,000 farmers in its direct farm program. It knows that there are 300,000 farmers who have been trained through us, that we've decreased wastage, we've increased their standard of living through the fact that the modern retail has had FDI restrictions removed from it. So I think the business can make sure that that education process is there. And I think it's the same in India, for example, through our partnership with Bharti. We've opened bricks and mortar training center. 5,000 students have graduated from that program, of which we've, for our business, have only hired 250. The rest go out into the general working population in the services industry. So, and I think that's also well known, certainly in the state of Punjab, where that's conducted. So I think business has a responsibility to play an active role in this process to make sure that there's a broader understanding outside just the simple negotiation around WTO or TPP.
Bill, let me follow up on this general question of regulatory harmonization and commitments about a broader topic. A lot of the critics of the trade system are particularly worried that trade restricts the ability of governments to do prudential regulation. And you have constant controversies about that. The trade oversteps, it's really overruling the public health officials, etc. As somebody who's had to deal with these concrete problems on many fronts, do you really think that this is a legitimate problem, or do you think it's a fear that's comes out of misunderstanding. How would you characterize
I
that?
think it's a fear that comes from misunderstanding. But with the average person, you want to believe that your system of your regulatory system, no matter how bad others may think it is, does a good job. And so amongst the average person out there, or in our country, I think we believe very strongly that in spite of its lapses at times, as we've seen in the financial sector and other sectors, that overall ours is the best. And I think so. There is amongst the public. So when you talk about, when they hear talk that other systems will be implemented on them, that they don't believe that they can be better. Most of the time, they will not believe that they can be better than theirs. As the policymakers try to convince them of that, it's a very difficult assumption.
Let me open this to any last comment anybody would like to know about this entire range of subjects we've been exploring. Any last thoughts anyone would like to offer?
I just want to say the last comment while the negotiations are going on, and somebody did mention that what gets agreed should not be opened up, and there are a lot many countries I see now want to pin developing nations either in climate change or labor laws. I think that has to be kept out, and there are forums for negotiations, and both those which should be run parallelly or concurrently, we don't mind. But to bring it back on the table when it will have this, it will only probably even go further and really go around into the next conclusion. So they must keep that in mind, that there are parallel forums which are being discussed and negotiated. We do believe that developing countries need to have a sustainable model. We are not disagreeing with that, but that should not become now a new wave of negotiations. Otherwise, we are, looking at probably this going far, far further.
Scott, any last thought you'd like to have?
Yeah. I think everyone's hungry.
Let me just offer one last observation, which is that the case of telecommunications is enlightening for the problem of the complexity of governance, because the trade negotiation was a way of breaking the regulators out of the international form that they traditionally relied on, which was the ITU, which was not attuned to global commercial realities. And so by having trade enter into the scene, it made the regulators sit down and say, okay, there's this new form that's going to be important. What is it that we do, and how does it relate to that? And therefore, what's our agenda in respect to that? And it's not that trade can solve all the problems of these other forest mandates. In fact, it shouldn't. But it's a way of calling the question in regards to the impact on the integration of international commercial flows. That's really the value of a trade agreement. It's not displacement of all the other ways and mechanisms. And in fact, if you were comparing this world to the world of, let's say, the beginning of the Uruguay round, one of the things that's really notable is the way in which mixed public and private and nonprofit solutions are complementing government decision-making in a very, very striking way. So we have a variety of tools that are evolving in the world, but the role of trade is to make sure that all of those evolving issue areas speak to the question of, so what does that mean at the bottom line for our ability to have an open world economy? And if we have that as a bottom line, I think that there is a positive solution that we can contribute to, whether it's multilateral or regional or bilateral level. But most of all of our progress will depend on the sorts of thoughts and actions that are represented by the members of this panel. So on behalf of everybody here, thank you for being here.
Ladies and gentlemen,